We just made camp at over 10,000 feet in the Eastern Sierra, and behind us are the 3 incredible 4x4s that got us here. Jason, tell us about the 3 vehicles that brought us here.
For this adventure, we picked 3 of the most capable SUVs that are on the market today. The Ford Bronco Badlands Sasquatch, Jeep's Wrangler Rubicon, and Toyota's all-new Land Cruiser.
Rubicon is the Rubicon 4xe.
That's true. It's the 4xe plug-in hybrid, and we have been cruising the trails in battery electric mode all day, and it is fabulous.
Well, by fabulous, you mean loud and exciting, right?
No, quite the opposite. The 4xe in electric mode is just wonderful because you can roll down the windows and listen to nature. You can hear the wind rustling in the trees, you can hear the birds. The loudest noise the vehicle makes, the rocks under your tires.
So we live in an age where you can have the rumble of a V8 under the hood of a Wrangler, and you can also wheel in just about complete silence.
And they both have the same amount of torque as well. The Wrangler 4xe has 470 pound-feet of torque, just like the 392 V8. It really is amazing.
And there's no real functional difference in capability either. I mean, they have the same clearance, the same approach and departure angles. Like, you're not getting anything different, just one makes an amazing noise and one of them makes no noise.
2 different powertrains and the same authentic Jeep Wrangler experience. We love it.
And if we're speaking about hybrids, the Toyota Land Cruiser is a hybrid as well, but it's a totally different type of hybrid system.
It is. It's a completely great. There's actually not even a screen or anything. There's not a badge. There's nothing to tell you that it's a hybrid if you don't know what the badge on the back actually means. But it's also not like a Prius. This one, it's much more similar to what's in the Tundra and previous Toyota trucks that have gone hybrid, in that they've sandwiched an electric motor just in between the engine and the transmission. So you get a lot of help from it, but you don't go like cruising along in like silent electric mode like you do in the Wrangler.
No, but with only 2 liters under the hood, this engine still puts out better than 450 pound-feet of torque, which is phenomenal, really.
And it's still like the Land Cruiser, even though it's a new slightly smaller package, it's still permanent full-time 4-wheel drive. It still has the locking diffs and disconnecting sway bar and all the features that you wanted out of it. It just looks different, is a bit smaller, and costs less now.
Scott, you say that this new Land Cruiser is every bit as good as the other Land Cruisers. However, there's been a lot of chatter about the tires.
Yeah, every bit is maybe saying a little too much. You can see just looking at them right now that these tires are not as aggressive as the ones on the Jeep and the Ford. They are just a more street-focused tire, and it also has the least amount of ground clearance here. It's actually slightly less than the old Land Cruiser, so your breakover angles aren't quite as good either. And we're talking small differences, but it is just on paper technically the least capable vehicle of the 3. Although it did get here.
Yeah, and thankfully, on the trails, it just took a little more attention, a little more finesse than, say, the Bronco with the 35-inch Goodyears. You could just bash through things with that vehicle, but the Land Cruiser, it did everything we asked of it, and the tires worked well. They didn't slip, they didn't slide. We didn't cut one. I mean, really, is it really a detriment to it?
I don't know. I mean, right, Jared? Like, I didn't use the lockers on the Toyota. You went through like the hardest section in the Toyota.
While I was driving, you saw the tires come way up and start waving, and I did not activate the lockers. I was just steady on that throttle, and I gave that vehicle plenty of chances to stumble, and it didn't. It pulled itself right through some pretty gnarly washouts, got itself over the rocks, and it might have kissed a skid plate here or there and used the rock rails, but it got through the trails. It did the job.
That is the thing. It did use its underbody protection, I think, more than the other 2 did.
But that's also what it's there for.
Yeah, Toyota adds a really robust skid plate package to the bottom of the Land Cruiser, and this first edition comes with rock rails, which we actually didn't use a whole lot, but when we did, we were thankful they were there.
Or you just put giant tires on it, like Ford over here, and you just drive over everything. I mean, we were kind of like choosing the dumb line, we were calling it, like, especially with the Jeep and the Ford. You could tell that you get in those ones, you're like, well, maybe I will drive over that rock just cause.
So driving the Bronco was a completely different experience than driving the Land Cruiser. Like Jason, you said something about the Bronco comes alive after you on the bumps if you're going a certain speed.
Yeah, the Bronco of all these three vehicles likes to go fast. It has the Haas suspension on it, which in Ford terms means Bilstein monotubes with reservoirs, which we all know and love because they do great at speed. So on the washboard roads, it really appreciated a little more speed, which was easy to do because of the Bronco's goat modes. So you could just quickly turn the dial, put the thing into Baja, it knew what settings it wanted, it moved it into 4 high, it disabled the traction control, it alters the throttle position, and it's ready to rock. Then you slow down, get to the rocks, put it in rock crawl mode, and it does the same thing. It puts it into 4 low, disconnects your sway bar, engages your locker, and the Bronco just knows what it needs to do when it needs to do it.
It's super friendly to, like, especially someone who's new to off-roading. Just twist the dial until the screen says whatever you're looking at out the windshield, and you'll probably be okay. The Toyota's a bit more complicated getting through its modes and things, figure out because you have to press a certain button and then twist a knob to get to the off-road modes because it's different than the drive modes. And then the Jeep is just old school. Like, you pull the lever and then, you decide when you feel like having, lockers or disconnecting the sway bar or whatever. It's all on you.
So I want to get this straight. Each one of these vehicles has 4-wheel drive, it has 4 high, and it also has a 4 low. Does each one of these vehicles have drive modes that I can put it into?
Technically, yes, because the Jeep does have its off-road plus mode. It's a hybrid, so you can have it in hybrid mode, you can have it in pure electric mode, and you can have it in battery save mode where the engine charges the battery or keeps the battery at a high level of charge to use later. So technically it does have modes, but not like the way we think of it in the other 2 trucks that are more about like, okay, you have your street driving modes and you've got your off-road modes, and each off-road mode is customized to a different type of terrain. The Jeep's sort of like, you can play with how the powertrain behaves, and then you tell us when you want to like really like screw around off-road. That's about it.
So we have, the Bronco has GOAT modes, you have multi-terrain select in the Land Cruiser, and in the Jeep Wrangler 4xe, we have that stick-shifted transfer case.
It's worth noting as well that the Bronco and the Land Cruiser also have modes that will do it for you. Ford has its trail control, Toyota has their crawl control, where you can put it in a mode, set it at a speed, and it will manage the throttle input and the braking while you have to focus on the steering. The Jeep is a lot more manual. You steer, you throttle all the time.
At MotorTrend, we're always looking for new ways to push vehicles to their limits, not just on the road, but on all kinds of incredible off-road trails. From rock crawling to multi-day overland adventures, we use OnX Offroad from start to finish, and even when stuff goes sideways. No cell reception? No problem. Just download a detailed base map before you set off, and OnX Offroad's GPS will keep track of where you've been and where you're going. For land use boundaries, places of interest, thousands of trails graded by difficulty, and more, we use OnX Offroad every time we get out into the field. If you want to discover places like the ones we explored today, scan the QR code or click the link in the bio to learn more about OnX Offroad.
Before we even could get to the trails, we had a few hundred miles of highway driving to get through. And if these vehicles are well-rounded adventure machines, they've got to play nice on the highway too.
The whole idea here, right, is that you want to load up the family and all your camping gear and stuff and go out for a weekend in the mountains, right? Well, most of that drive is going to be getting here, and you got to give it to the Toyota there that, like, okay, yeah, you can't blow all the roof panels off, but it is the quietest inside when you're doing 70 plus miles an hour on the freeway.
What kind of fuel mileage were we getting on the highway?
Well, it wasn't great. I mean, yes, 2 of these were hybrids, but they were self-reporting. I mean, this one, I think the Toyota was the champion, and it was, I think you got to 17.1 miles per gallon. It wasn't, it's no Prius. This powertrain is for making torque. It's not for getting good fuel economy. But it was the best of the 3, so got that going for it.
After driving these 4x4s for a few hours on the highway, what are some things that worked on the inside? Was one more comfortable than another?
I think the Toyota is the most car-like of the 3. They're all body-on-frame trucks, but it does have a normal solid roof. There's, nothing special going on. The doors don't come off of it. Like, it doesn't do any of those tricks that introduce challenges in the other vehicles. So yeah, the wind noise is quieter inside, and there's more insulation in the ceiling. Like the cloth roof on the Wrangler, like the sun comes, like you can feel the heat coming through it. So it gives you those sort of nice parts about it. But it also means you can't take the doors off, but you can't do the fun stuff either.
And that one has the smallest, most road-oriented tires too, versus 35-inch tires in the Bronco, which are all-terrains.
It's also quieter inside on the highway when you don't have so much tire roar, and your vehicle isn't quite as square as the other two. You don't get as much wind noise. So if you're only going to be doing highway commuting, the toy makes a pretty good name for itself, but there are trade-offs in that.
The Bronco and the Wrangler they are what they are. They're going to be a little bit louder on the highway, and you can fix that with the Wrangler by not getting the Sky One Touch top. It's the trade-off. You can get the solid roof panels, and it's a little bit less money, and it'll be a little bit quieter. You're not going to get away from the heat problem, as we noticed with the Bronco too. With its removable panels, they still radiate a lot of heat, especially out here in the hot summer. But neither of them are going to be incredibly loud. They're not uncomfortable. After 300 miles in them, nobody's fatigued, but you do start to notice, especially in the Jeep, the tires will follow the grooves in the road. You'll get a little more of that live axle wander that you gotta deal with. And as we were driving in high winds yesterday, it was pushing around the Wrangler and the Bronco more than the Land Cruiser. Not enough to be a problem, but it's there. It's a thing that exists, and it's just part of it.
You also notice we spent a lot of time in the Wrangler how narrow the body is compared to what we're used to in other vehicles. Like the door's right up next to you, you sit fairly close to the person in the passenger seat, and you don't necessarily think about it in the moment, but especially if you go sit in your friend's Bronco and you say how much wider it feels, it gives you a sense of like, man, it feels there's a lot of space inside the Bronco and you got room to stretch out, you're not like crammed in there. And the thing is, like, they're not technically that much wider or narrow than each other. Like the track width on the Jeep is pretty wide. It's not, but it's the bodywork itself that's pulled in, and it gives it that classic Jeep shape with the fenders, sticking out. But it also means that I think that's pretty clear the least interior space for people or cargo. Yeah, and we noticed that too when loading up our camping gear for this adventure, is that the back of the Wrangler doesn't give you a lot of room for activities, whereas the Bronco and the Land Cruiser, they have a much larger cargo area behind the back row, and even with the middle row seats folded down, you get a lot more space than in the Wrangler. And that's pretty important too, because if you are bringing the family with you, you might have people in the back seats, in which case you can't just fold them down and throw everything on top of them. Like you really start to need that extra. And then if you're going to start putting things on the roofs of them to, make up for the space that you don't have, well, now it's harder to take your roof panels off, and that's half the reason you got these in the first place, so you can take the roof off.
So you're saying there are certain trade-offs you have to make if you want more off-road capability versus manners when you're carrying friends and family down the road.
But hey, again, all three of them still got here despite that, so.
They are all still up here at over 10,000 feet. After a pretty rugged day of riding the trails, this wasn't an easy trail. Bronco and the Wrangler have a lot of tools that are really focused on crazy hardcore rock crawling trails. We didn't really put these vehicles to the ultimate test.
This is probably about, there's brand new trucks here. This trail was probably about as far as somebody who just bought one of these is going on their first, camping trip. They haven't started modifying it yet. They haven't changed anything on it. They want to get out into the woods. Like, that's about as much bashing of my brand new, quite expensive truck that I really want to do before I've, considered how I want to build it. Because at some point, if you really want to start, bashing rocks, you might want to think about building an older truck that you're not so, attached to, versus one that you just took out a very big loan for.
And there's no denying the popularity right now of this backcountry adventure travel that people are doing. And these are some of the most popular vehicles in that genre today. Like, people will buy the Wrangler and the Bronco and never go to a rock garden and never rock crawl it. That's not what they want to do. They want to do exactly what we're doing here.
And I think we really got to talk about what these things cost, because this is not it's not the old days of like, these were just basic trucks that, didn't cost anything. Like, the cheapest vehicle here is basically $70,000 for that Bronco. And that is not the highest spec Bronco. You can get a bigger engine, you can get more off-road capability, like even more than it already has. And then it only goes up from there.
So these are some expensive 4x4s. You're paying a lot of money to take a 4x4 down a decently difficult trail.
In Jeep's defense, the options package of the winch and the bumper, they add up, and the 4xe is not the least expensive Wrangler you can get. When the Land Cruiser, first edition, it's the high spec is $77,000.
And you can knock that down by, I think, down into the high 60s if you get the standard model that it loses, it has weaker tires on it, which these weren't anything special to begin with, although they did perform very well. And it loses some of the niceties. You get a cloth interior, like it dumbs it down a bit, but it still has all the same off-road hardware in it. So in theory, it performs nearly as well, at least as well as its tires will let it, to do the same sort of things that this one does.
So that brings us back to, why are we here? We're not here to go crazy rock crawling. We're not mud bogging. But this also isn't just a highway-only road trip. We're out here to drive a trail that anyone should be able to do in a reasonable stock 4x4. And that's what we did. Each one of these 4x4s got us here. So they can all do it. And which one did it best based on how much you want to pay and which features and functions and toys each one of these has.
I think we got to give it to the Ford. Not just because it's the cheapest, not just because it's the most capable, because the Jeep is probably as outfitted, probably a bit more capable, especially with the winch on it. But it just does everything that we wanted to do for this thing, right? If you wanted to load up the family, go camping for a week, you want a reasonably challenging trail, but, not something you actually need a winch for, not something that's going to throw the family around and throw all your stuff off the roof or anything. Like, it just kind of does it all right, and it makes it easy for you. It takes the stress out of it. You don't have to worry about, bashing it on things. Like, it's got a lot of capability right out of the box that, the other two can match it in some ways, but like the Toyota, you feel like you have to be a little more careful about the trail and about the line you pick. And the Jeep just doesn't have the space. The Ford just kind of gives you everything you need.
If the Ford Bronco is our first choice, it's the battle for second place now.
That's a really hard battle because they're two really good vehicles. However, based on the criteria that we've laid out of this backcountry travel, we feel that the Land Cruiser has it over the Wrangler just slightly because it has the quieter, more spacious interior. It's a very well-rounded vehicle, and it did everything that we asked it to do, and maybe a little more even. And it did it for a lot less money than the Jeep did. Could you take the Jeep on the Rubicon? Of course, but that's not what we're doing.
No, this was not a rock crawling adventure. This was, can we get to a pretty cool campsite in comfort with a few people and a lot of camping gear? And we did push that Land Cruiser through everything the other 4x4s did, and it did it, and it really didn't struggle. And there you have it. After 2 incredible days on the trail, the Ford Bronco was the right truck for this adventure through the Eastern Sierra.